Climate is a powerful thing in nature, and unfortunately, I guess, we have little control over it. Climate is also important in our relationships. But unlike nature's climate, we can greatly influence the climate in our relationships. Hi, I'm Greg Feeney, Communications faculty member here at Bluegrass Community and Technical College. And welcome to today's key concept lecture on creating and maintaining a positive climate. In today's lecture, I'm going to review 12 opposing terms, or 12 opposing variables that relate to or affect communication climate. And what we're talking about in communication climate is the social tone of a relationship. So as you see on the slide, there are different variables that affect this. The first ones listed, the first opposing variables, are evaluation versus description. So as you might guess, the description is more the positive side. So the more, when we're dealing with a problem, when we're dealing with an issue at hand, the more descriptive we are, rather than evaluating, rather than judging, rather than showing something to have more value than something else, the more likely it is that the climate is going to be positive. So it's reinforcing that we say, less likely, this is good or this is bad, and we describe more. So if we think something is bad, we don't necessarily need to label it as bad as much as it might be important that we describe why we think it's bad, because that gives the other individual important information. The next set of variables are certainty versus provisionalism. And what we're dealing with here is an open mind versus a know-it-all. So the provisional individual is somebody that comes to the table, that comes to a discussion, and is willing to learn. They're willing to show respect and value for the other individual and what they have to say. The certain individual knows the answer already. And so often they come across as, why do we even need to interact? I don't know that I need to hear what you have to say because my mind is already made up. Oftentimes, we may be in a discussion with someone and they are so certain, we may agree with them, but they come across as so dogmatic, we want to disagree with them. That exemplifies this very well. So the person that comes across as the know-it-all or being very certain, actually that behavior reinforces a more negative climate. So the more provisional you are, the more you come across as open. Doesn't mean that you're wishy-washy, doesn't mean that you might change your mind like this or that, but that you show that you want to hear from other people. You want to hear opposing sides. And you're much more likely to learn, but also create that positive climate. Next set of variables are spontaneity versus strategy. And this is, sticking with that same metaphor, that you come to the table with that open mind, but you're willing to negotiate. It's not that you have something specific, a particular strategy in mind. That you're going to work together in cooperation with the other individual or individuals toward that conclusion. So you can see where some of these overlap. You know, to be spontaneous or have a degree of spontaneity, you need to be somewhat provisional. And strategy often leads to certainty. And the more certain we are, the more we might strategize in relation to that certainty. So most of these do relate to each other. The next set of variables is control versus problem orientation. So in relation to that strategy we might have and how certain we are we working to control things in light of that particular plan? Or are we focusing on the problem and how we get there and our plan for it and controlling for that is less significant? What we view as being more significant in that is that the problem is resolved. And so oftentimes in the discussion of that we will focus less on our plan for it, our strategy for it, compared to what the problem is. And so we work on describing that problem. We work on being provisional, understanding the other person's perspective on that problem. We work at being open to many different routes and that spontaneity and solving that problem. But we focus on the problem itself and not so much on those plans. The next set is neutrality versus empathy. And this is one that people often get confused, that neutrality would be viewed as a behavior that promotes a negative climate. And the reason it does is the basic message with neutrality is I'm staying out of it. I don't care. That's kind of the extreme. I don't value this situation enough to step in. Where empathy doesn't mean that you necessarily choose a side and say, well, I think this one's better than the other, but you show value for sides. So somebody who is empathetic, shows worth, shows value, works to show understanding of how people are feeling. People that are neutral are often viewed as removed or that they don't care. So that obviously, if we look at those two opposing sides, the more empathetic we are, the more productive or positive our climate in a relationship is likely to be. The last two variables are superiority versus equality. And this is that we work to reinforce, create an atmosphere through our dialogue as well as through our nonverbals, how things are set up, how we behave, etc., that shows that I value the other individual or individuals and treat them and think of them as an equal, rather than looking at the power that I might have over them or trying to force something over on them. To view myself or my ideas as being superior to them, but that there's an emphasis on equality. So if we look at what we can do to create a positive climate in our relationships, we have six specific variables. And those are description, provisionalism, spontaneity, problem orientation, empathy, and equality. There's a couple important things that I would like to say about this. One is that what I encourage with my students is the focus in relation to these should be on you. If you learn more about these behaviors and you have the opportunity to see how powerful they can be in your relationships in relation to climate, work to apply them yourself. The more sometimes that we point to that other person and say, I learned this in my interpersonal class, my interpersonal communication class, you should be doing this, we might come across as being certain. We might come across as being a bit dogmatic, which is going to make for our climate to be more negative. The most powerful thing you can do is work to apply this to your specific behavior. The other is that probably one of the most significant things I would say that you can do in a relationship, one of the best investments that you can make, is giving time and energy to creating a positive climate. That means that when a problem occurs, if you have a positive climate, you're much more likely to be productive in dealing with that problem at hand than if you have a negative climate. In a negative climate, if you're mad at someone and you don't trust someone and they treat you badly, you're much more likely to respond to that in a much more negative manner than if you really like someone and value someone and feel like they respect you and they do the exact same thing. So I encourage you to put these to use and do what you can to create a positive climate in your relationships.